So, welcome back to Unfazed Under Fire. I'm David Craig Utz, the resilient leadership guy. I'm your host and moderator for this show. And this show aims to support executive leaders to improve their leadership impact and to gain insights into how to be more resilient in these crazy, uncertain, disruptive times. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Randall Doisaki, who is a colleague in the leadership development industry. And Randall is currently a law enforcement coach and is also setting up his own company to provide leadership coaching and training programs, as well as he's getting more involved in speaking on the topics of leadership and employee development. And in a few minutes, you're going to understand why he could provide such a rich background in that and really help people with that. Now, we connected a few weeks ago, and I knew right away that I wanted to have him on the show because of this rich background and how he orients to leadership is very aligned with my orientation. And I know you're going to gain a lot from hearing from him today. Now, he has a 30-year background in invaluable leadership experience in the U.S. Marines and from law enforcement. And in his work in law enforcement as a law enforcement coach, he aims to foster effective recruitment, retention, and development of officers to ensure police departments keep good officers engaged for longer. And he's also a retired sheriff's lieutenant himself. Now, Randall has also an job as an adjunct professor teaching American government and constitutional law. He is passionate about leadership and transformation and what leadership can bring to an organization. And he's also currently working on a book around his leadership lessons and teaches leadership principles. And in the short time I've known him, I can tell you he just has this unbridled energy around helping others. So he lives in the state. You live in the state of Colorado, and I want to welcome you on the show today, Randall. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, sir, and I hope the weather's good where you're at also.
Yeah, well, it is. It's starting to get chilly, but we just deal with that, right?
Yes, we do.
So I think a way I like to start off these conversations, Randall, is just to have you set the stage by sharing just, a little bit about your background and your journey into leadership and how that set the stage for your current position to want to help organizations develop leaders and improve employee retention and development. So if you could just share a little bit about however you want to share your journey and the highlights from your journey, just go ahead and go for it.
Well, to make it simple, I'm a lifelong learner. And as leaders learning, we've got to continue and grow. I look back to one of my mentors growing up, Dennis Sato, family-owned business here in Denver. And Dennis was a phenomenal, informal mentor of mine. It was in structure, but I learned a lot from him on how he does business, how the family, it was a family-owned business. And the Sato family and the Doizaki family had done business together for a couple of generations, first and second generation Japanese here in Colorado. And I learned at an early age, it's about the camaraderie, it's about taking care of your team. We would go out on the weekends and do volleyball. He'd take the employees, the families, we'd go and do volleyball. We'd get together. There's a lot of support and encouragement about the business side. And Dennis told me, I was like 16. And Dennis told me one day, he said, Randy, the reason we are, as a small retail garden center, are still in business and others are not, is we've adapted and we modify our business model on the market, on what our customers want.
Yeah.
And I looked at the work that you're doing, David, and you're reaching out, you're providing support for others. It's about encouraging that. But when I was a senior in high school, I knew I wanted to do something else. I was a bit of a troublemaker growing up. I was always in fights, I was a little hothead. And I knew I wanted to do something. I signed up for the Marine Corps 3 days after I turned 18 in January.
Wow.
And I didn't even talk to my parents about it. My dad was livid. My dad was Army, my little brother was Army. So Dad was a little upset that I went to Marine Corps. But I knew I wanted to do something, and I wanted to challenge myself. And becoming a Marine, there's that lifelong history. The Marine Corps embodies and they incorporate leadership. As soon as you start recruiting,
Right.
you sign up and you enlist. And the only difference I see between the Marine Corps and the other branches, other than we're a little bit known to be a little challenging sometimes, is that history that they ingrain. Once a Marine, always a Marine. It gets
Right.
in our blood. It becomes part of us. I know a buddy of mine, Joel Brunk. He's a auto guy. He auto body. He's been doing it for his whole life, and it's in his blood. But the leadership the Marine Corps brings, I ran with it. I loved it. So I got out of the Marine Corps, came back to Denver, did a number of other things, construction, fire water restoration. I've had a number of different management leadership positions, but I wasn't happy, and it wasn't the service that I wanted. So I went into the law enforcement academy out here in Colorado, put myself through the academy, eventually got hired with the sheriff's office, and I enjoyed it. I did a full career with the sheriff's office. But one of the things that I see we're not doing enough, and that's kind of set me apart with some of my peers, I identified where I wanted to end up, where I wanted
Yeah.
to be at retirement. So many people, and I've seen it in any profession, they get the job and they're thrilled. Well, what are you going to do next? And what's next? They're waiting for opportunity. They're waiting for someone to present. And I tell people, when they would start with the sheriff's office, I'd say, you want to be sheriff. Why would I want to be sheriff? That's a headache. I said, you start back, you identify. And I ran for county sheriff, so I know some of the challenges there, but you work backwards from where you want to end up. And you build on that. To be a lieutenant, I had to have a bachelor's degree. To be a well-rounded lieutenant, I had to work all the different areas, patrol, investigations, detentions. And to do that, I had to do it before I became a sergeant. So I kind of worked backwards. So I really enjoyed that. In 2017, I was eligible to retire. 2018, Denver Public, well, I'm going to limit the employer out of that. My current employer contacted me through LinkedIn and asked me if I was interested in their lieutenant position with Department of Safety. I went over, I applied. So I've been doing that since I retired on Friday from the sheriff's office, started my new position on a Monday. I had
Wow.
2 days of retirement, couldn't stand it, had to go back to work. So I've been doing that since 2018, but physically anymore, I'm at that point. My body says, yeah, you're too many miles. But
Right.
the passion was when I left the sheriff's office, I identified 3 sergeants and I mentored and worked with them to take over my position.
Right.
And that's the thing that I picked up from the Marine Corps is the military, you prepare and you guide somebody for that next rank. Because if you drop, somebody's going to take over. So in the private
Right.
sector, what happens if the CEO wins the lotto and doesn't come in tomorrow?
Right.
Or something happens and family dynamics or something change, and somebody in a position, a decision-making position within any organization, church, could be a religious, could be a fraternal organization, could be a structured project, community events, stuff like that. If those key individuals are unable to fulfill those, well, who's going to step in?
Right.
And I'm not seeing a lot of that. And that's where the challenge came for me, is getting people to think that way. And that's my passion. I like to see the aha moment go off in people's eyes. They sit there and like, I never thought about that. But
Well,
that's
that
on
is,
us.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that, I mean, I hear a lot in there. I mean, what the Marine Corps, if I'm extrapolating, and correct me if I'm wrong, drilled into you is what's the mission, right? What's the
Yes.
focus? Where are we going with these actions? What are these
Yes.
actions adding up to? And why are we doing what we're doing? And,
Correct.
as I tell my clients, even if you ultimately don't reach your goal, but you have a goal, it's going to take you down a pathway that will open you up to other possibilities that you then
Yes.
reset your goal. I didn't realize that was possible, but I would not have realized that was possible unless I had set this goal. I now can change my goal because I see something else that I desire,
Correct.
but now I have a new mission. And that's the trajectory of our life. We always have these new missions that show up, right? And we have to,
Yes.
but it's something about claiming it and clearly seeing it so you can focus your efforts. And I also love what you said about like the idea of, the people that are reporting to you, who are the ones you think could take over for you, so
Yes.
that you're preparing the organization That's
Yes.
beyond yourself. That's serving. That's actually an act of service to humble yourself and prepare somebody else to fill your shoes, right?
Yes. Well, and a simple example for me, as minor as it may seem, where my current office is located, we've got a couple of different satellite offices, but my primary office, you walk down the hall, and there are three offices before you get to mine. Mine's at the end of the hall. Everybody's got their name on the door but mine. I said, if you need my name on the door to know where my office is, that ain't right. I'm not doing it to have my name on the door. I'm there to support. If we have to promote ourselves, I go into offices and I talk with different leaders, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to others. I have a graduate degree in leadership and HR, and I understand the significance of continued education and the benefits of that. But when I walk in office and everything on the wall is about their degrees, about awards they've received and the recognition they've received, versus somebody else who has things about the department, things about the organization in their office. I've got, sitting on my desk here, I've got comments and regalia that officers and team members, I've got a coffee cup that a team of officers made, and they put their picture on it and referred to themselves, the four of them. And that means more than my diploma sits in a file drawer. And I think we got a lot of work to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what you're speaking to is really the highest form of leadership, Randall, and that's servant leadership. And or whatever, enlightened leadership or whatever you call it, but there is a higher order of expression of it, and it's beyond the role of being a leader, and true leaders is about we, not me, right? It's about us. It's about the collective, and most of the leaders that I know, their greatest passion is developing others. When somebody says to me, one of my greatest passions is developing others, I know I'm in the presence of a true leader or somebody aspiring to grow and develop that leadership role. So it's very well said. Now you have a very, there's a number of ways in which you've been brought up through different experiences that I think would be really enriching for our audience to hear about. And one of them was your Irish-German heritage, but you were brought up in a Japanese Buddhist household. Now, I'm curious how that upbringing influenced how you now look at leadership and espouse leadership. How did that influence you?
So one of the things I've done in the college classroom as an adjunct faculty for years, I've done it with the sheriff's office when I taught career development class in our sergeant academy. I've done it with the current officers, is I will put my last name on the board, Doizaki. And I was doing this long before any of the bias training and all this stuff became what it is today. And I guess I've been working on that for years, for decades. And I would put my name up and I would ask individuals, what is my family heritage? And they would look at me and they'd say German, they'd say Irish, they'd say Czech, they'd say something else. And I come back and said, you're biased. You looked at me and you tried to get my features to fit, try to get the name to fit my features. So my mother remarried when I was young. My father, the man who raised me, the man who made me who I am today, Tommy Doizaki, his parents, so my grandparents, the grandparents I grew up with, were from Japan. They came to the United States in the late 1800s. Our family tree goes back to the 1600s. So my mother had remarried, but when Tommy adopted us, his name is on my birth certificate. My biological father, Gary Wick, all my parents on both biological and on my father's side are all deceased. Aren't many of our family left. Like I said, we're thinning out. So I was raised in a Japanese Buddhist home growing up. And I've always looked at the Buddhist religion as a philosophy. It's a way of life about balancing and doing good with others, the Eightfold Noble Path, and so on. But then the twist is that my lovely wife of 36 years and I met in high school. Her parents are from Naples, Italy. She's an Italian Catholic.
Absolutely.
So you've got me raised in a Japanese Buddhist home, my wife Italian Catholic, and we had some great conversations. I think her daughter, or adult daughter, is still trying to figure out which way things go. but you look at some of that and that philosophy of doing right thought, right action, right deed. And I'm also associated with a fraternal organization as a Mason. And we look at the characteristics and what it brings into life. So I had a very unique growing up, but because of that, I've looked into other religions. I've read about different things. I try to expand and get to understand different. But again, that goes back, like you said, David, about being an authentic leader and a servant. And I don't see myself just as a true leader. I'm an expert leader because I build teams. I've had teams that
you've
phenomenal work, and they step up together. And that's what it's about. But I look at the balance that we have in bringing those different entities together in those conversations. We laugh and joke in the military, the camaraderie, the Marines against the Army and against the Navy and the Air Force. And the phrase that comes to mind is they say, what's the difference between the Air Force, Navy, Army, and the Marine Corps? So, well, the first three all have a football team. They're busy protecting a quarterback. The Marine Corps is busy protecting the country. So we have a lot of, but we all do the same job. We are here to protect the country and uphold our democratic government and what it stands for. But one of the things, and I don't go into it a lot, and I will tell you this is not in my book, I put on the badge when I came to realization, one of my issues that I've dealt with growing up, my family, I was 11 years old and my family was held hostage here in South Denver. Mm-hmm. And they took my mother to the door with a gun in their ribs. And my dad sitting behind the dining room table, between the table and the wall, with my 2-year-old sister on his lap. And he couldn't do anything to protect his family.
So tough.
The guy, he gave up. But the impact it had on the family, and then I'm going to jump ahead a few years after, and I got on the Marine Corps in 86, I got married in 87, and Gentleman Bennett came out, a guy arrived at the local bank here. He was shot and killed by a plainclothes off-duty officer working the bank because of this. And had he come in 5 minutes later, my lovely wife would have been gone. She was a bank teller at that time. So there was 2 incidents in my own life, and I said, you know what? Protecting and being that sheepdog, watching that, I'm the consequence for their action. And I encourage and I try to develop others with that same mindset that it's not about you or me, it's about us.
Yes.
If you or I or anybody in society, and we're standing there and somebody else is in danger, and we don't take action, I don't care if it's pulling somebody back from a sidewalk, from walking into traffic and trying to guide somebody, hey, don't go in there, you got a danger, watch those stairs, or whatever it is, then we're part of the problem. We're the ones that are contributing. But getting people to think that way, and especially in my profession, when I talk to individuals and I tell law enforcement officers, and a number of people in the community may come out and say, you're right, we got to do something about it. And we are trying. When a law enforcement officer goes into your home and they're in uniform, they got a badge on, they got a gun on, and there's a discernment, they're going to tell you to sit down, shut up in your house. And I train officers, and I do the same thing in the business sector, in the private sector. When you're a supervisor, a leader, a manager, and you have control and influence over others, you impact their vacation, you impact raises, potential promotion opportunities, potential phenomenal projects, crap projects. So as a law enforcement officer, you're being a bully in somebody's house. As a leader or manager or supervisor, you're in a position of control and intimidation over somebody. That's basically a bully. I know it's not the same mindset we generally look at, but that person approaching you as a manager or supervisor, they're already in an adversarial position because you have control and influence over their position.
Right.
So I bring that in, and I go back to being held hostage, to my wife working in the bank. I look at the impact. We were victims of a crime, and the impact. We had no say what those individuals are going to do. And as leaders, we've got to be thinking the same about trying to help our employees and the future of the organizations.
So are you saying in that, and make sure I get this right, that, you know, because you're somebody's boss, there's already an implication of authority there. It's unconscious and conscious, you know, and how we're conditioned around authority. And one of your jobs as a leader is to be aware and sensitive to that and understand, going back to your comments about outcome focus, that what is the
Mm-hmm.
outcome you want from that interaction with that individual, and how do you, in many cases, soften as you needed, depending on the situation, the bully side of that, the confrontative side of that, so that you are in a different relationship with them in support. Is that fair to say? Is that
Yes, yes,
yeah, yeah,
that is
yeah.
correct. So one of the things I look at, and it's a simple gesture as a boss, as a supervisor, is having somebody come to your office. So in my office, when I was in the sheriff's office, I always had a pot of coffee on. Now I'm the kind of guy that drinks coffee that will melt a plastic spoon. I'm having my second cup of coffee here this morning already,
Right.
and come in and have a cup of coffee. And you got people came in and they talked. I had individuals talking to me as the coordinator for the peer support program as well. And people would come in. I had people talking to me about fertility issues. I had people discussing other personal matters, but they were comfortable because the door was
Right.
open. And that goes back to being the coach. It's asking open-ended questions, letting them fill in the blanks, letting them come to those decisions, and
Hmm.
asking somebody, where do you want to end up with this? What is the end goal on this? How do we get there with these limited issues? But also getting your butt out of your chair and saying, hey, David, why don't you come over, sit in my chair? I'm going to sit on the outside of the desk, and let's have this conversation if you were sitting here. And what's the thought process? How do we get to that? We as in supervisory positions, and I do this on the board as well, and I've been doing this again for a couple of decades, and I've seen others doing it now. So I'll put math, like 4 math problems on the board: 9 times 1, 9 times 2, 9 times 3, and I always put 9 times 1 as 10. And then I turn around and say, what's the first thing you notice out of these 4 math problems? And he said, well, the first one's wrong. I said, it's either that or I'm an idiot and can't do math. But he said, we always focus on the one that was wrong. We don't do anything
I
about
see.
the other 3. Why are
Right.
we jumping to that? And I
Yeah.
talk now
Good point.
in my current position, and my supervisor always laughing at it, but I said, if it's not burning down in my profession, I look at it from a military and law enforcement background. So if it's not burning down and nobody's dying, nobody's life is in danger, we got some time to step back and breathe. People talk about mistakes. You can't make, to me, a mistake is if you do it twice. The
Right.
first time is learning opportunity. But if you
Right.
put somebody in your chair and you sit on the other side of the desk and walk through that and make them think about what is an outcome, how should we resolve this? What was the thought process
That's
going
well said.
in,
Yeah.
into your action?
Right.
We're too quick to
That's a
judge.
that's a good exercise for all my executive clients to do, is have your direct reports switch up the seating in a meeting and see what happens. That would be very,
Oh
very
yeah,
cool. Yeah, 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 yeah. Um,
everybody's got their seat, and why?
er- right, and there's a perspective from that seat, right? Or there's a skewed perception of what it is to be in that seat, right?
Yes,
Either way. Well, you know, it is something else. You know, you mentioned, you know, being a sheriff and or a lieutenant in the sheriff's department and running for sheriff, right? And I understand that, you know, that's the one law enforcement agent in the United States that actually is elected by the people, not assigned to the
correct.
job, right? And
That is correct.
so and that you're a professor and you're passionate about constitutional law.
Yes,
That may have been something that was reinforced or empowered by you being in that department, right? Because the department
yes,
has to understand that it is serving. Well, every officer should be serving the
right,
Constitution, right? But it's more obvious in that role, and you also teach constitutional law as an adjunct
correct,
professor. And I remember in
correct,
our first conversation, you brought up your book that you carry with you, which is the Constitution that you
correct.
carry with you. So when you look at that amazing document, how does that inform you know, leadership. You know, we live in a constitutional republic, right? We, you know, and so how can, you know, I think sometimes you in the corporate world we lose touch with that, not because we don't think it's important, but because we're so focused on our role and our job. But what is that document? How does that inform being a leader? And it's a big question, but I know, you
No,
know,
that's
what would you, yeah.
it's a perfect question because unfortunately, we generally have gotten away from some of that. What I
Yes.
found, in a particularly my position now, we have a number of individuals that are applying for positions, and I'm interacting with a lot of individuals that are immigrants and a lot of individuals that are coming in, and they're learning our Constitution and they're learning our form of government. And unfortunately, David, they know more about our structure and our constitutional structure than we do. They have to
Yeah.
pass the test. We don't.
Right.
And when I go and teach in the constitutional law and American government, and I'll go in there and I take the Constitution out. I don't remember data. I don't remember numbers.
Yeah.
My mind is picture. I can describe crime scenes and events to you, but I can't quote it. So I'd carry a copy of the Constitution with me, and I would read it verbatim. And one of the things that I think we got away from, and if you look at all the statutes and everything has been written based on the Constitution, that's where we get everything all mixed up. You got so many words in there and so many different amendments and addendums and everything else. But as an organization, as a leader, we've got to go back and look at the basis of any organization. If you look at, I don't care if you're making widgets, what is the end goal of making a widget? It's for a customer. What is the interest of the customer? And if we start putting all these different layers, and well, you can only lift it with your left hand, and then you got to turn around and put it in your right hand and put it on something else, we get too many layers in there. We get too convoluted, too many hands in the pot, and we're mixing things up. But in the Constitution, and I've had this conversation with my adult daughter when she was in high school and some of her friends, and to this day, it's still a debate, and people challenge. And I said, well, what is the basis of the Constitution? Was to keep government out of our business. It was to
Freedom,
say to
freedom, right? The freedom is
correct,
the basis of our country. Being got to be free to be who you are
correct,
and to express yourself within a certain, you know, as long as you don't get violent or harm other people, right?
correct.
That's the bottom line, right?
And that's where we talk about like freedom of religion. There are people that have an issue that my lovely wife, phenomenal lady, very patient woman, she puts up with all my issues, raised Catholic, and I was raised Buddhist. And her father, when I was in high school, big Italian guy, tells me on a Saturday, says, Randy, want to talk to you. Ingrid, raised in a good Catholic home. And I'm thinking, oh, crap. He's going to tell me touch my daughter and you're going to get hurt. But his comment was, I don't want you discussing religion. He was more concerned about me discussing Buddhism with his Catholic daughter. But then after I got out of the Marine Corps and we went to a presentation, an event here in Denver at the Tri-State Buddhist Church, and he sat in and he listened to a lecture on Buddhism. This man was raised Catholic. He was solid Catholic. He put his kids through Catholic school and so on. But he listened to it and he came back and he said, you know what, Randy? Buddhism and Catholic were on the same street going the same way. We're just on different sidewalks. And that brings that back. So the freedom of religion in that discussion, well, everybody comes in and they're challenging this and that. But the Constitution being a basis, being a foundation of our government and how we're structured, we kind of got away from that. And I think that's what I'm seeing, and I'll say that is what I'm seeing, in both in the law enforcement profession and in the private sector. People are getting away from the basis of the organization and the people. I think it was Lee Iacocca was a quote. You've got three things in business: people, product, profit. And you can't have product without profit without the first two, and you can't have a product without people. People should always be your first. And a lot of companies talk about, and be it a service industry or manufacturing or however, they always talk about the customer is right. And well, how is the customer right? And you get to appease the customer by asking questions. I've seen too many people get into debate and an argument with customers or stakeholders. Not necessarily doesn't have to be an end user. It could be somebody you're doing business with. And
Right.
it's about who's in charge, who's going to get the better end.
Right.
Well, a lot of times, all it means is stop and listen to their side, hear what they
Right.
have to say. And we're not doing
Right.
that. And that goes back to the
Yeah.
Constitution. You got away from it.
Well, and every, with most executives in an organization and decision making, the buck stops. There is a decision making tree, right? And there was in the
Yes, there
military
has
as
to be.
well. So there's some degree of freedom of speech, and then some degree of it's time for that to be over because we're
Yes.
taking the hill and I'm in charge, right? So
Yes.
so
I'm
how do
there.
you square with that? Like there because I believe that what you just said, it's not necessarily taking the concern somebody's bringing with you and changing the way you might
Correct.
do things, but it's also not about completely shutting that other person down and not listening to their concern, because within a expressed concern can be a nugget of gold that can support
Yes.
both of you in serving the ultimate decision, right?
Yes.
So what would you say about that, that we have, let's say, talk about that First Amendment right that we have as citizens, thank God, in this country? And how does that apply when you're leading in an organization, and how does that serve you to honor that as a leader?
Well, to me, part of it goes back to what I said about the comment about if it ain't burning down or nobody's in danger, we got time.
Right.
But in law
Right.
enforcement, I've been out on a number of crime scenes, and I've been out some very horrendous crime scenes. And as a supervisor, we have to come in and say, we line it out, and there's specific facts and there's expectations on what's to be done. But if we're building strong teams and we're building that partnership and that collaboration, and they know that, okay, everybody's got their part. And that's one of the things you look in the military. In the Marine Corps, you have your fire team. Everybody's got a specific task and a duty. In the military, the Special Forces units, Navy SEAL, Force Recon, Green Beret, and the Rangers, and so on. Every team, a team member has a specific task, and they all come together, and we train that way. So when it comes to critical action, we're prepared for it. In leadership in the private sector, you may not have a life-threatening situation, but if something happens, hypothetically, an organization that's a manufacturing company and something breaks down, what do you do? So I was a sanitation supervisor for a company, Unfazed, and they sent me to Manhattan, Kansas, American Institute of Baking. So they sent a Marine to a baking place with a lot of food. I don't know how that worked. But you come in and you've got to go through and you've got to sanitize, you've got to clean. Well, something breaks down. What's critical? How do you transition if this isn't working over to here to continue your productivity? How do you continue? But I think by working on some of those bases, when it comes down to it, if the team has faith in their leadership, and if there's that structure and that true cohesive, like in the Marine Corps, the camaraderie, the Semper Fi, the always faithful. And if the team understands it, and if they have leaders they have faith in, they're going to go with it. If they don't, they're going to sit back on their hands and wonder, well, okay, boss, you don't want us to do this. You tell us what you want to do. Okay, you want to do that. So there is a time and place to come in and dictate. In any industry, even in
Absolutely.
a religious organization, if you're coming in and something's happening, you may have a bishop or a pastor or somebody who's running the service who is the figurehead. But when something comes to it, sometimes they're going to have to step back because somebody else needs to step in and deal with something, or however it is. You've got somebody who's more empathetic and has that relationship with somebody who needs more support. We have, and one of the things to look at with our officers is, and I learned this a long time ago as a patrol deputy, and I learned it from a veteran officer. I had a little recipe card box. I know it was a paper card file on kids in the neighborhood that I'd run across, and I would stop in and I would check with them. Why should we be contacting them when it's always negative?
Right.
To go in and build that, and I had kids and their parents invite me to their graduation parties, community, neighborhood block parties, and events, and it's because that relationship with the community knew they could reach out to me. The teams I work with call and they say, hey, LT, I've still got people today that are no longer working in my chain of command that call me and said, hey, they bounce ideas off because that cohesiveness as a team. And the joke was usually if there's a fighter or something, they'd say when it's a sergeant or lieutenant, Where's the sergeant? Where's the LT? He's usually on the bottom of the pile with somebody with a fight, because I'm not willing to step back and just, I got to be willing to get my hands dirty. But when push came to shove, I said, I need this, no problem. And they'd go and they'd take care of it. They'd come back, we'd report, we do an assessment, do a review, and critique and come back to it. And I don't think we're seeing a lot of, everybody's got, we're just trying to push things out, and they're barking orders, and it doesn't always work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and what I hear you say is like at a crisis point, the chain of command comes into play. But when you're building your team, when you're exploring how do we handle that challenge or that project or that mission, or how are we going to approach this, that's a time when you want people to speak up and to share their mind and the thoughtfulness and to honor the wisdom that's potentially coming from everybody. Right. And I like that because, and one of the things I didn't think I was going to ask this, but now this pops into my mind is more of a global issue we're dealing with. And I'm not trying to get into politics here.
No,
but I am getting into a phrase that you hear some people saying is, well, the Constitution was created over 200 years ago. They didn't expect the modern times that we're in to be what they are. We need to revisit the whole thing. When you hear that, what do you say? What would you say to that? And I have an answer for that, but I'm curious what an expert in constitutional law would say to that. As far as, are they misunderstanding something, or what do you think? Well, how would you respond to that?
I've actually had that conversation with some people.
Yeah.
And some of it came from campaigning as a sheriff, running for sheriff, political office, and a lot of those discussions. The basis in any organization, if you do away with the foundation, what have you got? What do you base it on? If you scrap it all, what do you start with? I don't think it's the original document that's been the issue. I'm seeing it's the interpretation and the application in different areas. We've gotten away from the focus, and that's what I said, going back to like leadership itself. I don't think throwing it out, because then what got us here is a moot point. And where do we start? And I'm not saying that it would be totally anarchy or anything, but if you don't have the basis, if you go back to laws and all the history that's come about searching, and when we contact people, we have to have reasonable suspicion, probable cause to make those contacts. And people talk, and they come in and they want to rewrite state statute on contacting. And one of the lessons I used when I was teaching my adult daughter how to drive, I would tell her when she's in the driver's seat, I said, who's in the car in front of you? I don't know. Can you tell male, female, young, old? What their race is? No. I said, okay, then at night, the car's going the other direction. You're doing 35, they're doing 35, and you pass each other. Can you, if you're driving, see who's in that car? And I said, it's the same thing for law enforcement. We do not necessarily focus on the physical characteristics. We're looking at what they're doing when they're driving. We're looking at where they're at, what they're doing. And I think when we look at the Constitution, we kind of got away from some of that. And what you talked about when they say scrap it, I said, well, what are you going to put into place? You want to throw it out? Well, if you're going to make an example of something, give us an example of something better. Don't just say it's not working.
Right.
Don't come in challenge.
Isn't there also a mechanism in the Constitution that say if this has to be adjusted, right? You could have a constitutional convention with so many states agreeing to that, and you can revisit it that way. That's a way of doing it, but I still think it holds water pretty well.
It does. It's very basic, very simple, and we've gotten too many opinions and reviews of it. If we sat down and looked at it, it's like policy in a law enforcement agency. We make it so convoluted. Something as simple. Let's use uniforms. We want everything in a specific manner. Well, in the military, not just the Marine Corps, in the military, we do in this section of the book. It's about a junk in the bunk inspection, where you lay everything out and you have a 6-inch ruler and you measure it, and it's got to be very specific, and there's some uniformity and some structure to that. Doesn't matter where you're at, but the idea is that there's some structure and everybody knows what to operate under.
Yes.
The same guiding principles that everybody is held to. And that's one of the challenges And I see with the Constitution, you're correct. We've gone back and added amendments, giving women the right to vote, which, again, if you think historically, I've been married 36 years, wonderful woman, very patient, and I'll say that till she gets rid of me. But you look at some of what comes into that. The women had influence. The women influenced the men. How many of us sit there and listen to our better halves, and we get guidance and we bounce things off them? The work that I'm doing more of in the private sector, I talk to my lovely wife and get her feedback. They're directly involved, but why weren't they included and given that opportunity originally? Why wasn't that in there? And even looking at the differences in race and the actions we've had to take over the years to make up for challenges that weren't addressed then, because nobody wanted to face the challenges. Nobody wanted to acknowledge.
Well, there was only so much that group could do, and they did a pretty good job for getting it started. Were there things they could have done differently and more broadly? We could complain about that, or we could just revisit what we have to do today to improve it and make it better, but without changing the structure. Great. Well, I appreciate that. Now, there's something else that's coming up for you. You're in the process of writing a book.
Correct.
On leadership. And I wanted to give you some time to talk about what are you trying to, I don't know if you have a title yet or an orientation. What is the orientation of that book, and what are you trying to fundamentally communicate through that book to others that would help them be better leaders?
So in my time as an adjunct faculty, I've also taught a graduate level management class, and the basis of management is planning, organizing, leading, and control, POLC. And that's a principle for operations. And what I'm seeing we're lacking, there's a lot of people out there, and you've seen the books, and I'm listening to the different speeches and presentations by others that have promoted themselves as expert leaders or leadership experts, and they're talking things, but they don't have a lot of the background. What is going into this book, and the title is Beware, it's about leadership, not management. Yeah. And they're very basic, fundamental principles. They're not a lot of data. I haven't gone out. I've read the books that do the data analysis on companies that succeed, and over a period of time, the companies are doing great. Decades later, those companies are gone. The data in of itself,
that's true,
for me, is not providing the value and the benefits. So what this book is, it's taken a lot of axioms and different things from the military, primarily military, and some of the things that bring in. And it talks, like I just said, about junk on the bunk. It talks about having a cup of coffee or cracking a cold one with the troops. And going out and sitting down. An example on that specifically, when I was a sergeant with the sheriff's office and even as a lieutenant, we would invite our entire team, my lovely wife, and I would bring the entire team to our house on a weekend during the summer. We would have a potluck. We'd sit down and let our hair down. And it wasn't a real big, singling out. Everybody was invited. And the one year I got some trouble with my lovely wife, and this is about team building. And I invited the team to the house. She said, well, how many people? I said, well, I have 60 people assigned to me. And she goes, 60 people? So you're talking their spouses and their kids? To this day, David, I don't know how many people came through our house. I don't know who came, who went. I turn around, somebody's there. There's more food in the house than I knew what to do. But that's one of the things I put in the book, is about doing that. I put in the book about helping somebody else with a uniform in a military. When you're getting ready for inspection, you have somebody else helping you pull your pants up. Well, you're holding your shirt to tuck it in, and everything's lined up. It talks about the gig line from the shirt seam down to the zipper seam and how everything's nicely aligned. And the idea is to trigger thought, to get people to think about this stuff. And there are different sections in there. I put some things in there, articles that I've published on LinkedIn. And it's intended to get you thinking about how your relationship is with the team. Now, my lovely wife and my adult daughter and our friends will tell you, I'm not a very touchy-feely guy. I'm not a very emotional guy. A lady walked up to us. I was wearing, like I'm now, my Marine Corps T-shirts. Everybody buys me Marine Corps stuff. I'll buy whatever I want, but they give me gifts like this. So a woman walks up in the store and she says, my father was a Marine, and I was always raised to show appreciation. Can I give your husband a hug? And my wife looked at her and says, well, you're taking your life in your own hands because he doesn't hug. Don't touch him. But we talk about some of that with the reference emotional IQ, the emotional intelligence and how you interact. But that's what's in the book. It's practical, simple steps. It's not a lot of data. And I even put sections in there because if you're like me, I read something and I want to make notes. I'm always commenting. I'm reading different things. But it brings in, I've got a number of little just 2-sentence ideas to stop and think about. And then I'm already working on a second book about stop and think about meditative thought. I'm creating a workbook. The name of my company is Doizaki in Leadership, who I am and what I do. But the workbook is to tie into the first book, and it gives you steps. And it ties into, I'm incorporating in it 360 evaluation, or what one of my former lieutenants, Lori, initiated, was an upstream evaluation. Incorporating that in with doing the SWOT analysis that we do in business about strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats, and getting you to do a lot of self-reflection. I've done the DISC analysis. I've done the Myers-Briggs. I've done Insight and a number of other personality profiles. And it's great to have somebody else come and bring that data and do these analysis. And I'm not saying that they don't have a valid point. I'm actually looking at the Myers-Briggs and the NLP certification, all that stuff myself, just because it's a tool. But to me, the leadership, and that's what the book is about, is getting people to do a lot of self-reflection and stop and think about where they're at. We can give somebody lesson plans and all that. It's just not, I'm not saying where it's a lot of effective. And an example is we just had in-service training for our officers yesterday, and we teach report writing. Well, now we gave them some presentation of de-escalation skills. They had to do scenarios, and they had to write a narrative. We are now changing that adult learning model for our officers to help them grow and develop. You cannot make a shift, do that paradigm shift in that thinking for somebody unless you trigger that within them. And you've got to give them something. I've got 5 books sitting on my desk right now. I'm usually reading 3 at a time. And I read different topics. One's like on philosophy, one's on martial arts, one's on leadership, and the other one's about publishing to go with the book. So I'm reading 3 different books. But that learning, you get that trigger. So that's what the book's about. That's what the company's about. That's what my presentations and any speeches I give, I've gone out and done. And I haven't recorded any of them because I didn't do it for profit. I didn't do it as a business. I would go out and talk to individuals in the community and businesses about their growth. And one of the things I use is like WD-40. I asked people, do you know where WD-40 came from? I said, what's the history in it? They have no idea. Water displacement 40. It's the 40th formula that they found that works as a lubricant, primarily for aeronautics and so on. And you start looking at that like, okay. And then we talk about the different things. So I'll ask you, what is an octothorpe, David? You know what an octothorpe is?
I have to say I do not know what an octothorpe is, Randall.
And usually I will draw an octothorpe on the board in the classroom. And I even do this today. And I challenge you officers, if you look up octothorpe, it's what we know as a pound sign or a hashtag. Okay. The original name is octothorpe. I didn't know that. It was just one of those little trivia things.
I learned something today. I hope everybody else did. You're paying attention out there?
But those are the things, and that's what the book's about. And that's the passion for me, is getting people out of their comfort zone. Because it's like brushing your teeth with your left hand. I'm recovering from shoulder surgery, my 3rd one. I'm beat up. Too many miles on my body. But I had to brush my teeth and eat with my left hand. I'm right hand dominant. So you think about that. So even like you're right or left-handed, Dave?
I'm left-handed for writing and eating, and right-handed on sports. So I'm kind of do both.
Try eating with your other hand. Try switching.
But eating with my right hand would be a little challenging. Yes.
And that's what and simple things. But that then also triggers the brain. It starts working.
Yes.
There's a gentleman out there, I can't remember his name. He does the broken brain or something. I'm drawing a blank. I'll send you his name. I can't remember his name. But he does. Okay. He talks about things like that, and that's what we've got to do. So that's what the book and my focus is on. Hopefully,
I really love what you said in a couple of ways. I like to see if I summarize that right. I mean, to me, first of all, you can't lead others unless you understand who you are, right? You can't. There's so many, for years, and I think this is even more challenging today if we continue to go that route, where you're trying to read leadership books to figure out how to lead others. And you can't get that in a book. You have
No.
to go through the process of getting to know yourself and reflecting on yourself and learning about yourself, so you can understand how this mechanism called human being operates, because you got a front
Right.
row seat for it. And here you're
Yeah.
expected to lead other human beings, but you haven't understood even how the mechanism works for you, you know, and reflection is one of the primary ways. And it's we try to look in a book and get information out of it to somehow it's going to have an answer. And that's not how you get the most from a book. You also pointed to this. You get the most from the book by taking, even if you take one paragraph out of the book and decide to reflect on it for a week, you will get more from the book than if you read the whole book,
Yes.
right? How does this
Yes.
apply to my job and to me? And you take that one paragraph, that's all you, not that you shouldn't do the whole book, but that's where you're going to get more value. And really,
Yes.
it's about self-leadership first before you can lead others, right? You have
Correct.
to learn how to lead yourself. And I'm very passionate about this, you can tell too, because this is what I
Yes.
teach. I guarantee if somebody's in a classroom with you or me or somebody out there teaching them frameworks, and then go out and apply the framework versus reflect, get to know yourself, we're going to get leadership ramped up much faster,
Yes.
right? Because that's where it comes from. It's an inside out game. And so I appreciate that. And as I say, when I look into organizations today, and leaders tend to balk at reflection.
Yeah.
Now, they don't do it because they don't want to. They even see the value in it. But our attention keeps on getting drawn out at what's happening, what I have to do, everything in my calendar, my meetings I'm backed up on. And we do ourselves a disservice when we don't make our own time sacred for that
Yeah.
reflection. Because that, it's like the old lawyer phrase, pay me now or pay me later. I mean, if you don't do that, eventually it's going to cost you. So
Correct.
I really like the idea that you're giving principles to spark reflection, because that to me is a book worth reading. So,
Well, one of the things that I talk about, Dave, and I brought this up at other times, and it just kind of baffles me when you see people stop and think about it. The question is, and I'll do this in the classroom, and I'll ask, how many of you are in sales? And you got one or two people, well, I've done a little over here. I said, no, how many do sales on a regular basis? And they stopped, well, we're this and we're that. And I said, when you get up in the morning and you decide what you're going to wear, when you go and you buy a car, you are making the decision. It doesn't matter what the sales rep tells you. It doesn't matter what you see on a rack when you go and buy the clothes. You are selling yourself on the value of that shirt, on the value of that vehicle. You go to a restaurant and try this sometime. And I've done this, and it really messes with people when I tell them what I did to them. And I will ask them, I said, you know what, man, I'm just getting really hungry. A nice big burrito with some green chili on it. Now I'm getting hungry. And it is almost lunchtime. And, all the toppings and all the fixing. And then I got a little crispy chili relleno. I like spicy food. And chili relleno on the side, and I'm ready to go. And I said, who's ready for Mexican food for lunch? Everybody's like, yeah. I just sold them on what they want to do for lunch.
right.
We all get to go, well, what do you want to do for lunch? You got 5 or 6 people, and everybody's got something different. But if you go in there and you really want to sell it and you start talking about it, they said, LT, that ain't right. That's not right. You're messing with it. But you got to think about, you're selling yourself every day, and that's where it comes back to know yourself.
That's
and
true.
develop that.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of it in there. And as you can tell, I really enjoy poking and encouraging, like you said, about you move the seats around. It's great when you go into a college classroom and you've got rows, and the next time you come, you put it in a square, or you take the tables out and you put it in a circle, and you challenge us, and you make people, they come in, they're like, oh.
Well, we have I talk about this all the time. We have we grow up in the land of giants, right, as kids, and we are spoon-fed everything. and there's a bit of a rolling of the dice of what you're spoon fed based on your parents, your upbringing, your community, orientation of your parents, orientation of the community. And this is where community is so important, and we've lost contact with it, but that's another story. But
Yes,
but, but
we could
you're all
spend a whole other.
basically another old podcast on that one. But you're injected in a sense with what you should think, believe, do, act. But we live in a country, going back to your constitution, that's free, where you get to learn who you are, what you're about. And in many ways, when you're doing things like that, you are consciously challenging that conditioning, which is only
Yeah.
made up. It's not real. Now, I'm not saying it's not valuable. I'm not putting it down, but it's true that it is a way that your community created a way for you to operate that would make
Yeah.
everybody feel safe and connected or whatever. But if you buy that hook, line, and sinker and you never challenge that, you never really get to find out what your unique self is about.
Correct.
And and part of leadership is coming to understand what your brand is in life, if you will, and
Yes.
what you want to contribute. And I find it very interesting that many times I ask clients, executives in the C-suite or VP level, why do you show up at work every day? And it's always a lot of times about the job and what I'm expected and what I'm here to do. I'm a finance person, I'm a CFO, whatever. But why do you show up to work every day? And the idea of having a personal sense of connection to purpose, it may be developing others. It may be creating an environment where people thrive. It may be whatever it is. But when you have that, it creates a more robust experience where you can bring your unique gifts into the workplace to contribute them to make that workplace a better experience for everybody.
Yes.
And that every human being, it goes back to the founding of our country, every human being, the founders saw that every human being has a gift to give.
Yes.
And that if we oppress those people, what happens is the state of government gets that gift in a way that they decide to orchestrate that, and you miss
Yep.
out on having your own gift expressed, which makes the country weaker, or the community weaker, or the company weaker by us impinging our ideas on what you should be doing. Now, of course, we go back to structure and decision making, and there's mission and all that. That's how you keep a framework and people moving in one direction. But there's a lot of room for creativity within that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to be open to. We've got to be open to people making recommendations as leaders. And you and I have probably both seen it, and I've butted heads with it. I'm not the favored individual in some circles because I question things and I question the why and what. And we look at how we bring that into play. And like you said, within our own society, and I'll be honest with you, because of my background in law enforcement, I'm very careful and selective on how I broach certain subjects in the community because I want to be able to judge how that's going to be received. For years, as a sergeant with the sheriff's office, I ran the hostage negotiation team and peer support, the critical response team, and so on. One of my primary duties was I was the evidence sergeant. I oversaw the evidence warehouse, and people would ask what I would do. I said, I run a warehouse for a county. And that's it. I didn't tell them because they started asking questions. Oh, what do you know about this? Because I had all the goodies. I had drugs, weapons, property, and everything. And I didn't want to get into those discussions. That wasn't something. I dealt with some very bad people. I dealt with the Aurora theater shooter. I dealt with some of the other individuals here in Arapahoe County when I was with the sheriff's office. And I'm not getting into those conversations. And then people would, well, what about this one? I said, no, those are not conversations I'm going to have. But we do the same thing on other topics. We talk about, you and I talked a little bit about religion here. We talk about, my buddy's a Ford guy. I'm a GMC. I've got a big GMC lift on it. And I tell him, don't park that Ford in front of my house. It brings down the property value. But my employer gives me a Ford to drive. The Ford's parked in the driveway of my truck and my wife's SUV in the garage.
All right.
But you look at that. So, there's a lot that could be done, but we've got to be open to it. We've got to be willing to hear the other person's perspective and side.
Well, that's what we have to learn again. There's there's everybody has a right to share what's on their mind, and we have to
Yes.
learn how to listen better. And that doesn't mean we're taking that on. We're just honoring and respecting others. Well, we've gone a lot of places today, and there's a lot more. We'll have to, when your book comes out, we'll have to come have you back on again, and
Definitely.
we'll talk more. But is there
Definitely.
anything you want to say as we close out today that would be make you feel complete, that you wanted to share, that you thought you wanted to share coming on?
I always tell people, leaders are learners. If you're not learning,
Yes.
you're not going to lead.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your time, sir. I commend you for your work. I think you're doing phenomenal. I enjoy listening to your podcast. The people you get
Well,
on there and the conversations are always
and yeah,
enlightening.
that we started where, and it's great. We start. I love a full circle. We started where we start. You talked about being a learner at the beginning, and that was the last word. So I can. Yeah, that is so true. So we'll have to stay in touch. I want to see that book when it comes
Definitely.
out, and then maybe we'll talk about having you on again. And I want to thank
Definitely, sir.
everybody for joining us to hear this conversation today. I hope that you found it valuable. I'm sure you did. It was a very rich conversation. And please stay tuned for our next Unfazed Under Fire, which will be out in about 2 weeks. I'm David Craig Utz. I want to thank you again for joining the show. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Randall. Take care.
Take care, sir.